What if I told you that while the world was building steel behemoths, one nation went to war with tanks designed for jungles, islands, and infantry support? This is the untold story of every Japanese tank ever made. It's a fascinating journey of innovation, strict limitations, and the harsh realities of the battlefield that shaped Imperial Japan's armored forces from the 1920s right through the end of World War II. Japan's wars were fought primarily in Asia and the Pacific. Think dense jungles, rugged mountains, soft, swampy ground, and roads that were little more than dirt tracks. In these conditions, heavy tanks were simply impractical. They would get bogged down, couldn't cross flimsy bridges, and would be a logistical nightmare. So, Japan's engineers focused on what mattered most for their strategy: mobility, lightweight, and direct support for their soldiers on the ground. This often came at the cost of thick armor and powerful tank-killing guns. This unique philosophy is the key to understanding every single tank they ever produced. Let's rewind to the beginning. Japan's first tanks weren't even Japanese. In the 1920s, the Imperial Japanese Army looked to the West and imported Renault FT tanks from France. These were small, slow machines, but they were revolutionary for their time. They taught Japan the fundamentals of armored warfare and sparked the imagination of its own designers. This led to the creation of their first homegrown tank, the Type 89I, which rolled out in 1929. The I-Go was designed with one main job: to support the infantry. It became Japan's first mass-produced medium tank. Armed with a short-barreled 57mm gun, it was great at knocking out machine gun nests and fortifications, but was never really intended for tank-on-tank combat. It set the stage for what was to come. The real backbone of Japan's armored force, however, was its light tanks. These nimble vehicles were everywhere. That Type 92 heavy armored car, and despite that confusing name, it was basically a light tank, appeared in the early 1930s. It saw a lot of action in China. It was fast, reliable, but very lightly armed and armored. But the most famous Japanese light tank, the one you've probably seen in movies and games, was the Type 95 Heigo, introduced in 1935. The Heigo was the perfect tank for Japan's early campaigns. It was compact, agile, and crucially, easy to produce in large numbers. It became Japan's most numerous tank of the war and performed well against the poorly equipped Chinese forces. But a harsh reality check was coming. In 1939, at the battles of Khalkhin and Gol, Japanese forces clashed with the Soviet Union. The Heigo's thin armor was no match for Soviet anti-tank rifles and cannons. It was a brutal lesson that speed and numbers couldn't always overcome superior firepower and protection. The most important of these was the Type 97 Chiha, introduced in 1937. Just like the I-Go before it, the Chiha was initially armed with that same low-velocity 57mm gun. Again, fantastic for infantry support, but it bounced shells right off enemy tanks. The army knew this was a problem. After getting a taste of modern tank combat, they rushed to upgrade it. The result was that Type 97 Shinhoto Chiha, which means new turret Chiha. This version swapped the old gun for a new high-velocity 47mm cannon. The Shinhoto Chiha became Japan's best all-around tank of the war and saw action everywhere, from the Philippines to Burma. As the war progressed, Japan developed a Type 1 Chiha-E. It was a solid improvement, with better armor and a slightly more powerful engine. But by the time it was ready, Japan's industry was struggling under the weight of Allied bombing and severe resource shortages. Only a limited number were ever built. As Allied tanks got bigger and better, with the M for Sherman becoming a common sight, Japan scrambled to catch up. Their late war designs were impressive, but ultimately, they were too little, too late. The Type 3 Chinook was a direct answer to the Sherman. It was essentially a Chihi chassis fitted with a powerful 75mm gun, the same type used in their field artillery. This gun could definitely penetrate a Sherman's armor. But by the time the Chinook was being produced, Japan was on the defensive. The High Command decided to keep these powerful new tanks on the home islands, saving them for the final, decisive battle against an anticipated American invasion. As a result, the Shinyu never saw combat. Then came the true next-generation designs, the Type 4 Shinyu and the Type 5 Shuri. On paper, these were formidable machines, comparable to later Allied and German medium tanks like the Panther. The Chi-2 had a long 75mm gun and sloped armor. The Shuri was even more ambitious, planned to have a 75mm main gun and an experimental belt-fed autoloader. These tanks could have made a real difference. But again, industrial reality hit hard. Japan simply didn't have the steel or the factory capacity to mass-produce them. Only a handful of prototypes were ever completed before the war ended. Beyond traditional tanks, Japan was also incredibly innovative with specialized vehicles. The ONI series, for example, took existing tank chassis and mounted powerful anti-tank guns on them, creating effective tank destroyers and mobile artillery. Then there was the ORO, which carried a massive 150mm howitzer. This wasn't for fighting tanks. It was a mobile bunker buster designed to obliterate enemy fortifications with a single, devastating shot. But perhaps the most uniquely Japanese innovation was their amphibious tanks. For a nation fighting an island-hopping war across the vast Pacific, getting tanks from a ship to the shore was a huge challenge. Their solution was ingenious. The Type 2 Kami and Type 3 KIC were light and medium tanks designed to swim. They were fitted with large detachable flotation pontoons at the front and back, and a propeller driven by the tank's engine. Once they reached the beach, the crew could jettison the pontoons from inside the tank and join the fight immediately. This was a concept years ahead of its time, a clever solution born from specific strategic needs. So, with all this clever engineering, why did Japanese tanks ultimately fall behind? There are a few key reasons. First, their armor was consistently thin, making them vulnerable to almost all Allied anti-tank weapons, even heavy machine guns in some cases. Second, their engines were often underpowered, which limited how much armor and firepower they could add to new designs. Third, many early tanks lacked radios, making coordination in battle incredibly difficult. But the biggest factor was national priority. Japan was an island nation, and its leadership poured the vast majority of its resources, especially its precious steel, into building warships and aircraft. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Force always came first. The armored forces were consistently underfunded and left to make do with what was left. Despite being outclassed, especially late in the war, it's wrong to call Japanese tanks failures. They were tools designed for a specific job to support infantry in the unique environments of Asia and the Pacific. In the early campaigns, they performed that job adequately. But when the strategic situation changed and they found themselves facing modern combat arms forces with superior tanks, their limitations became painfully obvious. Today, surviving Japanese tanks are incredibly rare. You can find them in museums around the world, silent steel relics of a bygone era. They stand as a testament to a unique armored philosophy that chose mobility and adaptability over brute force and heavy armor. The story of Japanese tanks proves that war isn't just about who has the most powerful weapon. It's about strategy, resources, geography, and the specific challenges of where, how, and why that power is used. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into military history, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video.